Welcome along to this documentary session. My guest this afternoon, my name is Ruth Pitt. I'm a producer and writer, and Morgan Matthews is my guest this afternoon. It's fantastic to have Morgan here, and I'm sure many of you will be familiar with his work. He's a multi-award-winning documentary maker who turned to fiction and now sort of combines both, don't you, really? Morgan set up Minnow Films, which has quickly established itself as a leading producer of factual programmes, and he's also established a reputation as a nurturer of new talent. So I'll be talking to him a lot about how he developed his own career, and hopefully you'll be able to get some insights for your own careers from that. Morgan is also extremely keen on eccentric characters, let's say, and maybe vulnerable characters, and certainly in finding the extraordinary in the ordinary and the ordinary in the extraordinary, I think it would be fair to say.
Yes.
So we're going to show a lot of clips and we're going to rattle through, but please do ask questions during the session if you want to. It's not always easy for me to catch your eye because we're under bright lights, but really wave and shout if you want to ask questions, and there will obviously be time at the end, but if there's anything that crops up, I'll try and stop every now and then and ask you if you have any questions. I can't see the people over here very well, but most of you are in the centre. Okay, well, let's kick off with your own early life, Morgan, because I think it does, in a sense, inform your filmmaking. You had a childhood growing up really surrounded by vulnerable people because of the work your parents did.
Yes. Kind of, yeah. I mean, I think I was always interested in, I suppose, people at what you might call a kind of roots level, going through tumultuous, interesting, extraordinary times. My mother was a community worker for single parents. My stepfather worked with kids who had been excluded from school. And it's only now, really, I think, in retrospect, that I can see that had an influence.
But do you think it also explains why you seem to be very comfortable around people in very difficult, challenging situations?
Well, I think there was also, I mean, there was a bit of illness in my own family, but which just became quite normal to be around. Although it got a bit extreme sometimes as well. But I think just the normalisation of that, for me, it wasn't something that kind of freaked me out in any way at all.
But you could have chosen, I suppose, to be a social worker or a youth worker, but you chose to be a filmmaker. What was it that led you to that? What were the early influences? Because you did go to film school, didn't you?
Well, I did a degree in film. I don't know if technically it counts as film school, but I went to the London College of Printing, which I don't know if there are any students from that course here, which is now the London College of Communication, actually. But I did a degree in film. But before that, I'd become very interested in photography. I was interested, first of all, I mean, I don't think that the understanding that I was interested in people in those situations came to me until later. First of all, I was interested in art, in photography. I studied photography.
So it was the visual, really, at the beginning.
Yeah, and the creative side of things. And I did an A-level in photography, and that became my main interest. But then I realised at some point that I wanted to tell the stories. I wanted the people to tell their own stories rather than the images. And I wanted to be able to put those stories together. And I also understood I suppose, social impact or potential social impact of documentary. And when I was very young, I watched a documentary called 14 Days in May. And that, for me, was a very powerful film. It was made by Paul Heyman, who was a documentary maker working out at the BBC at the time. And it tracked the last 14 days of this man's life, Edward Earl Jones, I think his name is. And
it's quite a famous piece that probably influenced a lot of people, I would imagine.
And I was probably about 14 when I watched it, and I couldn't believe, it was like happening in slow motion, I couldn't believe that this man was going to be put to death by other people. It just seemed extraordinary and horrific. And there was a big question mark over his guilt. But whether or not there had been that question mark, I felt it was utterly wrong. And I felt that after watching that, it was very difficult for me to imagine that somebody else could watch that and think that the death penalty was right. So I kind of understood, if you like, the power of documentary
Yeah.
at that point.
And also, in a sense, you're adding, you know, the need for social justice into that mix that you already had of understanding vulnerable people. I want to come to show a clip in a minute from Care Home, which was a film that you sort of made and shot yourself. But just tell us very briefly about the first kind of big documentary break you had, which was Paddington Green, wasn't it?
Well, kind of. I was doing my degree, and at that time, I think we were just less aware of the industry outside of our courses, and they were sort of slightly hermetically sealed. I think courses now are generally more vocational, and people understand the sort of structures of television and who people are and all of that sort of thing much better than we did. But I was always doing bits of unpaid kind of work experience with other companies making documentaries at Diverse with Roy Ackerman. And although they were unpaid positions, they did give me breaks, proper breaks, and I got credits as a researcher on a Secret Lives about Jeremy Thorpe and a cutting edge that Madonna Benjamin did, and you know, so I was lucky in that I was getting that experience, and that when I came out of my course, I already had some, I suppose, connections and experience, which then landed me a 2-week job at Lion Television, working on a pilot for Paddington Green, which was a big docusoap series at the height of the popularity of docusoaps.
It was quite innovative. I remember this was basically just about ordinary people who lived in the Paddington area.
It was meant to be a real life soap, and yeah, just one area in London, Paddington Green, which seemed to ever expand as we kept looking for people to be in the series, and it was a real melting pot of people who lived in that area.
But a good place to cut your teeth. I'm going to rattle on now to Care Home, because you quite rapidly found yourself at Century Films, which again is a company well known for innovative documentary making. And you made Care Home. Shall we just take a look at that clip and then you can talk it through?
Sure.
Okay, if we can see that clip, please.
What is it?
Hold up.
Mr. Matthews, who's he? Oh, you?
Yeah,
Yeah. So what does that mean then?
that's for you.
Why?
Because we're going to United.
Yeah, but I can't afford £23.
Huh?
I can't afford £23.
That's all right, it's on me.
It's on you.
Yeah.
When?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
Yeah.
So you've seen John about this? What's he say?
It's cool.
What's he say about me then?
Sorry?
What's he say about me?
It's cool.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
How are we getting there?
Driving.
What about lunch and that?
We'll get it there.
No money.
That's all right, don't worry about it.
I've never been to a football match before. It's a bit of a shock, like, you know.
You don't have to go.
No, I'll go. I'll come definitely with you, yeah?
David is also a Man United supporter, so it was only fair that he got a ticket too. But judging by his behaviour, he had already heard there was one going spare.
I've never been to Old Trafford. That's one of my wishes, to go and see him play there. Because I really love to do. It'd be a nice time if I went. I really love going to Old Trafford.
So how long have you supported United for?
I'm 35 now, so I've been supporting them 34 years. 15 years I've been supporting Man United. I've only seen them play on telly. Not real though. I haven't seen them play real live at Old Trafford. Never.
Anyway, I've got something for you.
I don't believe it. I'll have to phone me up and tell her. I'll have to really phone me up and tell her. Somebody at the door. Oh, sorry, they knocked me out.
Hi, David. What do you do? Are you the lucky one?
I thought down queue winding up yesterday.
Hope you enjoy yourself.
I've been here for a back.
Don't need to. I'm coming with you. That's Morgan. That's Morgan.
Is this true?
Organised it with John today.
That's what you call being close to your subjects.
Yeah, and I mean, the whole film isn't like that. And I suppose I chose that clip because, you know, at the time that I was making the film, I became so embedded in that house and with those residents who all had learning difficulties, that there was just a lot of back and forth between us, a lot of interaction. They asked me as many questions as I asked them. And I didn't set out to make a film that had me in it as a presence, and actually heard my voice on there narrating it. It was the first film that I narrated, which I was really resistant to. I didn't want to do that at all. And I think I had about 4 viewings with the commissioning editor, Richard Klein, until I finally conceded to doing that. And he made the point that, well, you're in this film as well. You know, you've put yourself in this film, and you know, you're a presence behind the camera. So we need to hear your voice guiding us through this.
So in a way, it's interesting that you say that, because that does sort of, in a sense, it's a good illustration of how, you know, having the right person supporting you and kind of maybe seeing something in you that you may not see in yourself, or seeing some potential in something, is really important. And Richard Klein was one of those people for you.
No, definitely. And he was at the BBC at that time. He's now at ITV. And he certainly took a punt on me and the films that I wanted to make, and gave them the space for me to make them, and wasn't overly imposing. And although he imposed that commentary, it wasn't necessarily a bad decision, although I still cringe when I hear it.
Well, it sounded okay to me. I want to move on to My Crazy Parents now. Just set up this film for us a little bit before we take a look at it, and tell us how that came to be made.
Well, the idea, I think it was my idea at the time that I took to Channel 4, and I was interested in looking at mental illness, but through the eyes of children, and children who had parents who were mentally unwell. And that was the initial idea, and very straightforward pitch, I suppose. And I went to see Simon Dixon, who was a commissioning editor at Channel 4 at the time. And unusually, he got it straight away and pretty much commissioned it straight away.
Because this was at a time, in a way, when mental health wasn't a subject that television wanted to go very close to very often. No. It's a bit easier now than it would have been
It is
then.
and it isn't. I mean, I think that there are different ways of approaching mental illness which have been done very well, particularly on BBC Three. But no, there weren't. I mean, that channel didn't exist, so there were less opportunities to explore it in an accessible way, I suppose. And the, I suppose, common notion was that it was a heavy subject and people wouldn't want to watch it. And actually, watching this clip, people might agree with that.
It's not an easy watch, but shall we take a look at it, and then we can talk a little bit about the challenges of actually getting the access and sustaining it?
Yes.
Okay, we'll have a look at the My Crazy Parents clip, please.
My name is Jade and I am 7 years old. Most of the time I live with my mummy and my 2 brothers in our house in Glasgow. But I'm not living at home now because my mummy got really ill and we had to go away to live somewhere else. So now I am writing a story about what happened to me and my family.
Jade's mum, Michelle, has suffered with mental health problems for over 20 years. A prolific self-harmer, she was recently diagnosed with psychotic depression. And during the months I spent making this film, the effects of her illness would turn family life upside down.
When I get the horrible feelings, I need to see blood.
Maybe if I got off some of the medication, I might get better. I feel worse for it. I've not seen my kids for about since the 29th, the 30th. I've had 2 phone calls. And I promised me I'd get to see my kids. And I never
What have you just done?
I just got myself again.
Michelle had said she was going to the toilet, but used it as an opportunity to cut herself.
I need to get plastered. But I think it needs stitched.
Where are you?
In the kitchen.
What'd you get up for?
Because I'm so angry with myself. Hate stitches.
You need stitches in it.
I'm not going for them. I'm not going. No way.
You seem quite different now.
I feel better. A lot better.
Why?
Still in the way I can alleviate it. Just cut. You make sure the kids get their uniforms. Sorry about the argument earlier on. Right. See you later.
Shoes on top.
It's interesting how you held on that shot. I mean, that's sort
Well,
of... set
actually, it
your-
cuts a little bit early because that slow-mo continues. And one of the reasons why I suppose I showed that clip is really about the use of the music and the editing as much as it is about the subject matter and the treatment of that.
Just explain that a bit more.
Well, I mean, I think first of all, it was the first time that I worked with a composer that I've now worked with a lot called Sam Hooper. And applying that music to me was very important, and music has always been very important in the films that I make. And the relationship that I've had with the composers that I've worked with, of which there were probably only 2 or 3 who I think are wonderful, has been very, very important for me. So establishing those relationships, not just with your composer, but also your editor as well. And again, I've worked with 2 or 3 editors who are fantastic and have contributed an enormous amount to the character of my films. But, you know, this is, I mean, this was 12 years ago, something, I'm not even sure, it was a long time ago. And I suppose just trying different ways of doing things at that time, jump cutting, using music in that way. I'm not saying it was nobody else was doing that, but I think when you're thinking about the films that you're making, that if you can think about how you're using your music and your cutting as much as the subject that you're approaching.
So getting together, if you like, a trusted team of people who provide all the different elements from really early on in your career is good advice.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any questions before we move on? Oh, yes, somebody's waving up there, yes.
Hi.
Marvellous, thank you.
Hi, Ruth. Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
A delicate question. Being documentaries, how much of these sequences we've seen have been directed? Because I could see some sort of, you know, chain things coming up. And in the first one, in Care Home, how many cameras did you use, say, when the encounter between the two took place in a room?
Sure.
Thank you.
I mean, it's all of these films that we're going to see pretty much up to the last clip, if we get to it, a self-shot. So it's just me and a camera. And that's also very important to the way that I worked, particularly at the beginning of my career and the subjects that I was able to get involved with. And it was the when I first started, it was the advent of DV cameras, which probably are relics of the past now, but they were sort of semi-domestic, semi-pro cameras that for a couple of £1,000s, which compared to broadcast cameras at that time, was incredibly cheap, could shoot broadcast quality just about images. And so it meant that people like me who came fresh out of my film degree could pick up a camera and shoot. And it also meant that I could stay out all night if I wanted to. I wasn't with the crew having to kind of be conscious of their hours and having lunch and all that sort of thing.
It was just you. That was the only
Pretty
camera.
much.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I would always advise and hope to work with a great producer as well. And most of the films that I've done, I've worked with in a two-person team. And there's been a great producer with me who has also often done the sound. You see, I sometimes do the sound myself as well with radio mics and, you know, top mic on the camera and all that sort of thing, and swapping around the jacks depending on who you've got on a radio mic. So, but in terms of your question about directing, I think there's always directing going on, but often, you know, that isn't necessarily in the moment. It's in the moment in terms of your shot choices and the questions you decide to ask, and the timing of those, and the relationship that you've developed. That's all part of directing. But, you know, at no point am I saying, can you just hold your hand up, you know, and let me see that cut on your wrist or anything like that, or directing it in any way like that. You know, that is unfolding as it unfolded. Of course, with the care home situation, that was a situation that I'd created, and most of the film isn't like that. But it was just something that I wanted to do for the guys. And you had Darren, who had this room that they all had themed rooms in the care home. And Darren had his Man United themed room with Man United wallpaper, Man United top, Man United cups, Man United lamp, everything, but had never been to a match. And it just seemed to me to be a nice thing to do. But I didn't ever know whether it would be part of the film or not.
But sort of picking up on that, both with Care Home and My Crazy Parents, you know, the really defining characteristic was your commitment. I mean, you just sort of threw yourself into getting to know those people, didn't you?
I think all of the films that make, you know, have that to an extent, and, you know, particularly the early ones, that you just fall in love with a subject, with a place, with people, and can't kind of almost be away from that. I think with the Care Home film, I was, I don't know, 6 months making that film maybe, and it was up in York, and whenever I was away from it, I used to feel like, you know, I need to be there, and invariably when I went away, I would miss something as well. So it felt like I couldn't leave, and I had a flat up there. We were renting a flat, and so I was pretty much staying up there all the time.
So the message for young filmmakers is you've really got to commit and stick with it. One of the things that's defined your career is that you've always managed to mix the sort of lighter with the darker. And the next clip we're going to talk about is the taxidermy film, which again is a well-known film of yours. And you know, the most bizarre subject, really. Before we have a look at it, could you just tell us a little bit about taxidermy?
So it's a film about the World Taxidermy Championships. It was a 90-minute film, again, a Richard Klein commission at the BBC. And I'd known about the World Show for some time, strangely perhaps, but I had a childhood interest in natural history and animals in general. And when I was a kid, I used to get like stuffed birds for Christmas from a junk shop or whatever. That used to be what I used to, you know, that covered.
So it was a personal interest.
Yeah, and I kind of understood that love. It wasn't a macabre thing. For most taxidermists, especially European ones, the American ones quite different, trophy hunting, all that sort of stuff. For most European ones, it's about the preservation of beauty and animals that have died of natural causes, and being close to something that you find beautiful.
So again, you were looking for something that you personally cared about, as well as, in this case, it being quite an amusing subject. Should we take a look at it and we can talk about it? Thank you. Can we see the taxidermy?
What's that, Matthew?
That is a moment shot of me at the last World Taxidermy competition, in moment where they gave out the results, and in moment where I understood that I was the new world champion.
I can't find the word. Thank you very much.
I remember that I was like in a trance. I was like in a film, you know. And I had the impression to fly there before. You see? In that moment, a dream, really a dream for my life became true, became reality. But higher up you are on a mountain, so deeper is the fall. Huh? And that was what I lived then. I felt so down, so strong and straight, wham, down, that I came in the biggest crisis of my life.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Guild of Taxidermists Conference 2004. I'm sorry we're running a little bit late.
What's the standard like here?
It goes from good, bad to totally indifferent. Generally, it's average.
And where do you fit into that?
Above.
Above average?
Way above.
The Wagstaff Trophy for Best Cased Exhibit goes to Jack Fishwick for a turnstone. Go on, clear off.
Yeah.
Bloody nuisance.
What do people think of you?
Big-headed. Arrogant. But they're mistaking confidence for arrogance.
The Norfolk Trophy for Best Groundwork, that goes to Jack Fishwick for a turnstone. Well done.
Thank you.
What does it mean to you to win here?
Nothing.
Why?
It's a hollow victory.
And in first place was Song Thrush by Jack Fishwick.
This is like the village show, the village fair.
I'm so pleased.
But when you get over to the world show, you're a little fish in a great big ocean.
So eccentric characters piled on eccentric characters in a way. And maybe, you can spot in people, what isn't particularly interesting to a lot of people on the surface.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, it's very apparent what's interesting. And it's instantly interesting. I don't know if everybody else finds it so, but for me that was clear, and there were some great characters, and I think although there is light in this film, there's also quite a lot of shade, and I think with the films that I've made with the subjects that might be seen as being lighter, I've always found the sort of shade in those subjects, and equally with the subjects that have been, I suppose, on the surface quite heavy, I've always looked for the lightness in there. Or it's not necessarily that I've looked for it, it's just that it occurs naturally, because it's very rare that you're in a situation, whatever it might be. I've made films about grief, death, all sorts, and it's rarely incessantly bleak.
Yes, or rarely incessantly funny. So you've done Elvis impersonators, you've done pigeon fanciers, and there's always something profound in there that you find.
Well, I hope I'm, profound, but I'm hopefully meaningful and moving. It's important to me to make films that are moving as well.
You also like the long-form film, the 90-minute film, and it's not easy to find slots that are 90 minutes long. What's the appeal of that? Is it just because you don't like editing yourself, or is it because you think you can say more?
Well, I think there's probably a bit of that in all of us, not wanting our films to be longer than they probably should be. I think that it's allowed me to explore subjects in a greater depth sometimes, and there's a different kind of arc to a 90-minute film, or a film that's even longer than that, and particularly a documentary. And to sustain that, I suppose that for me is a more natural arc, it feels personally, and I think the way that I shoot and the length of time often that I spend on a subject, that to me has felt like a more natural arc or shape for a film.
So obviously the industry itself would tend to agree with you, because you keep on getting commissioned to make 90-minute films. At this point, I'm going to move on to Beautiful Young Minds, because that was a very big film, which subsequently led to a feature film, but you made a factual piece about it first. And by this time you were at Blast Films. You'd moved from Century, where you learned a lot about filmmaking.
Yeah, Century, I think, was the first company where I made films that I felt were my own films, as opposed to within the structure of a a big series that already has a format that's been established and a style that's been established. And then from there I moved on to Blast, and I suppose carried on making films in a similar way that I established at Century.
But Beautiful Young Minds was a cinema release.
It wasn't actually a cinema release, but it was a feature-length film that was also commissioned by Richard Klein. Oh, really? Okay. But it grew out of, so I made the film about the taxidermy championships, and out of that grew a series about what you might call niche competitions, which included the World Hairdressing Championships. Maybe that's not niche, but anyway, the $1 million pigeon race, as you mentioned, and the World Elvis Impersonating Championships. I felt that one of these films would probably fall down or just not turn out to be very good or whatever. And so we started looking around for almost a backup idea. And that's when the producer that I was working with brought to my attention the International Mathematical Olympiad, which is a competition that attracts the brightest young mathematical minds from around the world. And we went to meet this group of kids as they were training. I think this was the first time I'd met them, actually, and we went straight out to Hungary. They were on a training camp with Hungarian students. And it was the first time I'd met them, and I just thought that they were brilliant characters, and it opened up this whole world to me, which I knew very little about.
Well, let's take a look at Beautiful Young Minds.
Can you just explain to me what you're doing?
I am making a chess set, which I will then use to play on the floor over there, by taking cups and identifying them so that it is possible to tell between them. The ones with the tea bags will be blacks pieces, and the ones with out tea bags will be whites. The kings both have sugar cubes because there isn't enough Coke to go round. The queens have large quantities of orange juice. The rooks are going to be marked with milk, and the bishops have a bit of Coca-Cola, and the knights will be identified with a small amount of orange juice. So, this is black side, by the way. King, queen.
What about the coat, Con? What's with the coat today?
Well, I felt like, well, I've worn this, and that for most of the trip, except for changes. And I decided to wear a lab coat because I felt like it, and it might afford me, make me a slightly less visible target for snowballs if we choose to walk outside.
Oh, it's pretty up.
Snowball fights are simply an attempt to legitimise a particular form of victimisation physically. It's a way of having fun at the fact that you're essentially causing some kind of damage. Otherwise, all that there is being achieved by throwing snowballs, I suppose, would be to prove that you can hit targets.
You look like you were enjoying yourself though today, Jules. Out in the snow.
No. That must have been a very unusual illusion.
So in a way, you're giving there a platform to a group of rather curious young people who are often outsiders.
Well, I mean, I didn't really see it like that. I just thought that they were fascinating, and Joss, who was the guy at the end there, any time you spend with Joss in a room with a camera is interesting, and he says brilliant things. And it just has this different and very original take on life.
But quite stressful to maintain a relationship as a filmmaker over a long period of time, presumably, very full on.
Well, no, I found it very rewarding because we would always have very good conversations, and he was very dry, and he would take the piss out of me, but I found that it was funny, but the thing was he was quite abrasive, and a lot of the other kids on the camp eventually kind of ostracized him, which I felt, which was very sad for me, because here were a group of kids who had often experienced bullying or being ostracized in their everyday environments at school, and when they got together, suddenly there was this frisson, people like them who wanted to do maths all day and night. But even within that group, that they then managed to ostracize one of their own, if you like.
Very interesting. Do we have any? Yes, we've got a question here. Is there a microphone? If you can leap down to the front, please. Thank you.
Hi. I was going to ask you about what sort of ethical process you go through when you make a film, and some of maybe the dilemmas that you have in terms of things that you'd actually put into the films or things that you might leave out.
Well, I mean, it's a big question, and I think that every subject that you approach has those issues, and that for me, there's a process involved. Of course, you have commissioning editor, you usually have an executive, and you have a team of people, and between you kind of work out what you're comfortable with. But for me, it's also about what the people in the film are comfortable with. And if I always show the people in my films the films before they go out. And I think that because usually we've had this very long time together, I have an understanding of them as people and what would upset them. And I don't want to make a film that upsets the people who are in it. There's no value in that. I want to tell the truth.
And do you always show your films to the subjects?
Yeah, I think we do. And I mean, The Fallen, which is a film that's coming up, and it's 3 hours long, and there's like hundreds of people in it. It's quite challenging, and I think we might have just showed their individual sections. But yeah, we do.
So that's an important part of, I suppose, resolving the ethical dilemmas, is you've got to have the person approve of the portrait that you're painting.
If you know they're going to watch it at the end, and you know that their family are going to watch it, and you've already built up this trust with them, then it's not something that you would abuse, So, whilst there might be people who watch those films and feel that a line might have been crossed, the people within that film are happy with it. And that, for me, is the most important thing.
So you mentioned The Fallen, and we're going to show a clip from The Fallen in a minute. But the big interesting thing in your career that I think people would want to know a little bit about that happened, before The Fallen, was that you set up your own company, Minnow. And that must have been a challenge because, A, you set it up, I guess, because you wanted to be more in charge of what you were doing, but also you then became an employer, and as the company's grown, you've had to be a grown-up in a way and sort of exec other people's...
I don't think so yet.
But you've had to exec other people's work as well. So just tell me a little bit about Minnow before we watch The Fallen.
Sure. I mean, it wasn't really about control, setting up the company. And, I can understand that would be the motivation for some people, that you think that you can make films in the way that you want to make them. But I was already lucky enough, I suppose, to be making films in a way that I was happy with, and had the freedom to do that, and people who were supporting me to do that in commissioning. And that was the main thing, really. And I suppose because I had that, and because I was more and more operating quite independently, although I had executive producers, I wouldn't say they were particularly hands-on, but that was partly because of my approach to filmmaking. So it felt to me like I was making films out of other companies, but I could just be doing that out of my own company.
But it's a big responsibility to be running a company, and presumably as you've carried on filmmaking, you have been looking after other films as well. Has that come naturally to you, or has that been... And finding talent, of course, bringing on the next generation of filmmakers?
Well, I've always seen Minnow as a place to house great filmmakers, and whether they be established filmmakers or people who are coming through new talent. And not just a place to house talent, but also a nice place to work. And we really care about the films that we make, and I hope that people see the integrity in those films. But that was all it was. It was a very kind of simple ethos, I suppose, behind setting up the company. And there are many very big companies, and I would say we're a medium-sized company. and that are big businesses now. And I never really set up with the intention of it being a business.
You've not sold it to.
No, we're
big
independent.
conglomerate. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's important to you, presumably.
Yeah, I think it's been important in the way that we've run the business, and why we set it up.
And in terms of talent at the beginning of their career, how do you respond to people when they write to you? Do you like to see people's short examples of their work, or do you bring people in to
I think it depends at what stage they're at. I think it's always interesting to see a graduation film if somebody has one, but they don't necessarily have to have come from a film school or film degree background. There's lots of other skills that we need and backgrounds which are kind of appropriate to documentary filmmaking.
Sort of specialisms, if you like. They might have a particular knowledge of a subject.
And it might be history, it might be English, or a different kind of background.
And good ideas, presumably, if they bring in
ideas are the currency of our business.
Yeah.
And there are lots of people who I've always generally worked on my own ideas, or ideas that have come from somewhere very close to me, usually. I think it's really important to be able to, you've already got an interest in a subject, you know why you want to make it. But there are fantastic directors who I know who don't really do that, come up with their own ideas, and companies, executives come up with the idea and they go and work on that film.
Yeah.
And they do brilliant jobs. So there are different ways of working, but for me it was always important to be working on something that was close to me.
So that brings us to The Fallen, because again, that was something that I'm assuming that was your idea, the idea of looking at war through this particular lens. Can we show a clip of The Fallen and then we'll discuss that?
Sure.
You have to lift the thing up.
Do you mind?
No. You have to lift it right up.
What does it say at the top?
The rifles, then it's got his bugle, then it's got Fallen Hero, because that's where he was.
When did you get that done?
About 3 weeks ago. He was like a lag in the Jack Daniels for a chaser. So now and again I have one of them for him.
Are you drinking more now as well as a...
That's all we do, drink.
And how much are you drinking in a day?
Put it this way, candy lost because we come home in some states. Some bunny states.
Perhaps you're forgetting that, things like that. It's the next morning when you wake up, it's the same again. It's exactly the same again. End of the story. I lost my fucking Ben and I loved him a bit. He's my baby. He fucking right, no? Right, he's my baby. There's kisses on the cheek and everything. Dad, I love you. How? What? How the fuck? What the fucking? And I lost him. I've lost a son what I shouldn't even sign for. I shouldn't even sign that name for him to go in the army. Because I knew what was going on over there. Yeah, wrap it in, man.
Right, I'm only going to tell you once.
What?
This is a documentary for my dead son.
That's
so
all right.
stop pointing. The camera's not even pointing at you.
Listen, I haven't got none
It's
my
not
fucking
pointing
face.
at you.
Right.
It's not pointing at you.
My face.
It's not looking at your face. Who was looking at your face? This is for my son.
That's all right.
It's for my son. The camera's not even looking at you.
That's okay then.
Why don't you start on that man? It's got nothing to do with you.
Right. You know?
Turn the other way. I'll shove the camera up you, never mind the cameraman.
And you as well.
Aye, will you? Fuck off.
Eh? I don't plan the fuss, don't I? I don't plan the fuss.
One for your lass.
No, just get me one. Never mind fucking her, just get me one. She's out all night, man. I go home early.
Yeah.
Go home early and sit in the sitting room like a prick, like I always do. Light a candle.
That's no good doing that though.
And where have I gone wrong? That's what I do, where have I gone wrong? But that's me. It's fucking me up there.
Because you loved him.
I'm 61-year-old now, you know.
Yeah.
You're the fucking pint, I'm going home anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm fucking drunk as a cunt, man. Oh, son, man.
What's that Foster's at?
Pan of Foster's.
Just really harrowing. For those not familiar with this, just explain, it was 3 hours long, explain the proposition.
So it was a 3-hour-long documentary commissioned by the BBC, and which I think at that time was and probably still is, the longest film that they've commissioned to go out in a single hit. But the idea was that we were going to document every single British service person who had died in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars up to that date that it went out. And for me, I felt that I was, and I mean, this is probably 2008, 2007, and I felt that those wars were getting further and further back in the news agenda, and that every time that there was a death of a soldier, it appeared to be, you know, it's page 3, then it's page 4, then it's page 5, then it's page 6, and just a tiny little piece about it, a little picture, and then a few very generic words underneath, saying something along the lines of, he died doing a job he loved, he was a legend, he was a hero, or that the parents were very angry because they felt that their son had been sent out to a war which shouldn't have happened in the first place, or he didn't have the proper kit to protect him. And those were the only two kind of narratives coming out of those wars. And it felt that they were becoming increasingly generic and that we were becoming disconnected from the reality of this loss that was happening.
So this was a really innovative way to put it back into the public consciousness, if you like. But it was so massive, you can't have shot them all yourself. It must have been a big...
No, I did.
You did? You shot every single one yourself? Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And how about the research process? How many people were helping you with that?
There was probably a team of about 3 people who were a producer again, an assistant producer and researcher. But this was a different kind of film in that because there were so many people, partly because of that, and partly because the stories that they were telling, I wanted them to be telling them to me for the first time. I didn't want to turn up. This is not an embedded film where, you know, we spend 6 months with each family. So the producers that I was working with and the researchers, they would call people in advance. They would get their story in the detail, which they would then pass on to me, and then I would arrive and pretty much get the camera out straight away and start filming. And we would often only spend a day or 2 days with each family. And then we did come back to them later and we did do subsequent interviews. But that initial first meeting was very important, and capturing that, because sometimes the first time you meet somebody is the best time in terms of the way that they're going to speak to you.
Almost all the more powerful.
About something which is retrospective in that way.
And you did develop, for want of a better word, that brand with scenes from a teenage killing, which was again logging every person who'd been stabbed.
Well, not just stabbed, but every violent death of a teenager in the UK in a single year. And it was at a time, I suppose it felt like there was quite a lot of press around the subject, but again, the reporting was very generic. And you see a picture, again, small picture of a teenager, and often the word gang violence is mentioned or gang attack. And that's not really being unpacked or explored. And particularly if it's a young black teenager as well. And I think, again, the generic reporting of those deaths made me want to look into them in more detail. And actually what we found is that hardly any of these deaths were actually what you would call gang-related. Very small number.
So in other words, we sort of make the wrong assumptions about these people's lives quite often.
Yeah, assuming somebody is in a gang and when they're actually not. You know, these are often groups of friends or people who have fallen out over very minor things, and it's gone way too far. But yes, very, very few, I would say, were gang-related.
So big, harrowing subjects. Any questions before we move? Yes, there's a question here.
Hello.
Hi.
Has there ever been a time when you've been filming documentaries where you found it really emotionally tough, especially like the first time you met the parents of those soldiers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, if you weren't affected by it, there's probably something wrong, you know. But at the same time, and I think when I've been asked before, that must have been really awful, you know, or it must have been really terrible for you. And it's not, because if people want you to be there, which they do, and they want to tell their story, which they do, and they want to talk about their son, which they do, and remember their son, and have him remembered publicly, which they do, then it feels like a good thing to do. It feels like a positive thing to do. And that process of talking to people, although very emotional, can be very cathartic for them. And as long as you know that they want that, then it feels like a good thing to be doing. And, you know, we talked earlier about why I wouldn't be a social worker. And, you know, I feel that there are lots of people who do extraordinary jobs, and they're working with people in very difficult situations. And I just feel it's just being absorbed into them, you know, what they're dealing with on a daily basis, and really heavy stuff. And that must be very, very difficult. But for me, I sort of feel by having the camera there, that it's not that it provides a barrier between me and them, but I know that this is important stuff, and it's going into the camera, and then it's going to be shared with lots of people. So it's almost like it's not being wasted. And I feel that that's very important. So it doesn't, I never feel like, oh, this is a bit, you know, I don't want to be here. Yes, there's been situations, the teenage killing one, I don't want to go to another funeral of a young person, you know, ever again. But at the time, it felt that it was important that I was there to document it.
And in a way, people are often grateful to be given that chance to have a voice.
Well, it's a positive thing.
Yes,
you know, it's
even
a positive
in the
thing.
darkest of circumstances.
The most difficult films I've made have been when people don't want you to be there, and it's a subject that actually isn't really delivering something which feels meaningful, like the World Hairdressing Championships.
Well, that might segue us quite neatly into the next film, which is an extraordinary departure from the kind of filmmaking we've been talking about, which is shooting Bigfoot. Let's just have a look at this, and then you can perhaps explain the appeal of it for you.
It's about Bigfoot, people who look for Bigfoot.
It's the sort of the weirdest film, I think it would be fair to say.
Rick? Did you hear anything? What the fuck it was? What did you hear? I heard something. Hey, don't put that at me. What? Don't put it at me.
The scope is unbelievable.
Hey, wait, do you reckon Jeff is cool?
Dude, I just saw a fucking kid, man.
Huh?
I just saw a fucking kid.
Kid?
That's fucking weird, bro.
A kid?
A fucking kid.
You're just fucking to hear it.
Fucking with you. It sounds like I'm fucking with you. It sounds like I'm fucking with you. But I wouldn't fuck with you like this. That's why I'm tearing up the goddamn flesh.
Thanks for freaking me out, Rick.
There was a girl, a little girl, 5 or 6 years old, in a fucking dress at the end of my scope. No bullshit.
I'm going to bed, Rick.
What's happening?
So this is my Blair Witch impression. Clearly not a very good one. But Rick is doing his best to freak me out again. And I don't know, I don't believe that there was a child in the woods in a night dress. And he could have chosen a more original image to try and freak me out and weird, but still the whole situation is just a bit odd, and I don't know, I mean, Rick is kind of, I just don't know when he's being straight and when he's not.
Well, so what was the appeal of that?
Well, I think to me it's just a sort of an example, and I think a lot of the films that we've seen have possibly been made in a similar way, but there also came a point where, for me now, when I make a film, I want to make a film in a different way, this it's also, in a way, going back to how I very first made films as well, by just being me and a camera and a bloke in the woods. And that, you know, when in situations where it could be that there's not a lot happening, but actually you find some drama in that situation, or just the interaction between you, which in this case was quite spiky, and that was quite rare for me in terms of the people that I'd filmed with before, because as I've said, most of them are like people, you know, you develop this relationship and friendship and trust, and between Rick and I, there wasn't that. There was a relationship, but it was a very spiky one, and there certainly wasn't trust. And I didn't trust him, and he didn't trust me. And really, this is a film about truth and our perceptions of truth and what truth is, and people who kind of create their own truth. And if you believe in something enough, that it sort of becomes true.
Okay, well, you talked about, you know, as you get more experience, wanting to find new ways of telling stories, and you have started directing drama now, haven't you? Fiction. You've started, the Beautiful Young Minds documentary has become a feature film, X and Y. I'm hoping that we can go on for an extra 5 minutes because we started a bit late. Is that okay? Yeah, 5 minutes extra. So shall we just very quickly look at the very short clip from your feature film, and then perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about...
Well, so Beautiful Young Minds, which was about the International Mathematical Olympiad, out of that grew X plus Y, which is a feature film that follows Nathan, Ace Butterfield in the corner of the screen there, on his journey towards the International Mathematical Olympiad. So it was very much inspired by the documentary, and a lot of what is in the feature film did happen.
And did this seem a natural progression for you to get into?
Partly that, again, it's that challenge of now when I make a film that I want to be challenged by a form that feels different to me, not in a way that I've done it before. And then when I go back to the original way of making films that I started with, that feels fresh and liberating rather than, oh, I'm making a film like this again.
But it presumably takes a lot more to get a feature film commissioned even than it does a documentary.
Oh, yeah, it's a long time. And you know, first feature film, I think it was probably 6 or 7 years from when we came up with the idea and pitched it to when it was released in the cinemas.
Okay, well, we'll have a very quick look at that and then we'll take some questions. Was it a painful or a liberating transition?
Well, I think firstly, I mean, I chose that clip in particular because he's an actor, but we're in what I would call documentary situations. So none of those people are extras. We're just walking around the streets of Taipei in the way that I would if I was making a documentary. And actually, Taipei is a brilliant place to shoot a drama because nobody really cares what you're doing or looks at the camera particularly. And you can be, as we were in this case, walking around with a much bigger crew and a steady cam, and people don't seem to be interested in that. So I suppose I was bringing a lot from my documentary background into the way that we shot this feature film. So that was important. I think that was also important to the people who backed me going into it. But I was also working with a whole new team of people who I'd never worked with before, a very big team, a very structured way of working, because drama is so much more structured than documentary, especially in the way that I've been used to making documentary, which is, as I described, a very kind of liberated, free way. If you want to stay up all night, it's great. If you want to, if you don't shoot anything, it doesn't matter because you don't have the pressure of a crew and the expense of that. And then you go to drama and to a feature film, and the scale is so much bigger and the hours are very strict and rigid. And I think the first day that we started shooting, and my producer said to me, you need to wrap at 7. And I said, yeah, but it's all right if we go on to like 7:30, isn't it? And she's like, no, it's not all right. That incurs huge costs. And also, the crew won't work past that time, really. You can't flog a crew,
So another whole
a drama crew to
big
death
learning
like that.
curve.
It's just not a done thing.
Really fascinating, different way of working. Okay, well, a million questions I'd like to ask you, but here are a lot of people who want to ask questions. If you can keep your questions short and the answers short, we'll take that person first, second, and then third. Where was the person who put that there? 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Hi, Morgan.
Hi.
I just wondered, most of the films that you've made are sort of about, social issues, and they sort of cover things that people would identify with on a broader scale. And then when it came to your Bigfoot documentary, for example, it's
Which
sort
is
of
obviously a very important social issue.
it's an obscure sort of documentary in terms of form, and also obscure in terms of subject matter. So my question to you is, how often does the BBC commission things that would be obscure in form and also content?
Well, I suppose it depends on your definition of obscure. I mean, I wouldn't argue with you that Bigfoot hunting is, niche, and there's probably, although in the States it's quite a big deal. There's a lot of people doing it. It's almost like a religion, and that was what was interesting for me. But commissions like that are rare. And you might find that a sort of subject like that would be approached using a presenter or somebody leading it in some way. To have an observational documentary, yes, I would say it's quite rare to get a commission like that. But I think it's partly just because I'd established those relationships, and what's also important, especially any kind of commission that you're going to get, and it doesn't matter who you are, now people, commissioners want to see what they call a taster tape, which is a short little film that you've knocked together from the people, with the people who you think are going to be in your film, giving some sense of it, some kind of flavour of it. And if you have that and it's good, then you're in a much better chance to get a commission. And with the films I make now, we still have to do that.
Yes, that's almost universal. Right, second question here.
Yeah, hello, Morgan.
Hi.
Basically, coming from a workflow point of view, so once you've got that idea for that documentary, how would you go about it? So the scripting, not so much the storyboarding, obviously, because documentary is meant to have that realism sort of effect. So how do you go about contextualising that idea and selling it on?
Well, again, I think that comes down to often within the industry, there's usually a period of development. So you go to a commissioner with an idea, pitch the idea. If they like it, they might give you a little bit of money to go away and shoot a taster tape, as we just described, and that would be accompanied often by a written treatment outlining where you think this is going to go. I mean, certainly in the past, I've made films where I don't know where they're going to go. And that's the thing about documentaries. So there's this strange situation where, you know, you're often being asked to predict what's going to happen, but to give the commissioner the reassurance that something is going to happen and that they know what they're getting, they know what they're paying for to an extent. But we're also making documentaries, and you don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And sometimes I've been lucky enough to make films where it's just, this is a subject that I'm interested in, these people are clearly interesting, I'm not sure what's going to happen on the way, but I know stuff will happen.
Can I ask Morgan then, in sort of connection with that, at what point are you actually scripting? At what point are you writing a script? Just in the cutting room?
I don't.
You don't write a script at all?
No scripts.
Right.
No, I mean, I write a commentary script if it needs a commentary. But that is just really the way that I work, and that doesn't necessarily apply to everything that we do at Minnow. And there are very different ways of making films, and there are films that require structuring. And whether it's retrospective or historical or interview-based or conceptual, there are reasons to script a film, but I wouldn't say that's something that I've ever done.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting.
Hi, how is the editing process for you of your documentaries, and how much does it change your view in the editing room from what you saw when you shot it?
Well, I mean, I love the edit for a start, and I probably spent, I can't, you know, if I counted up the amount of time I spent in an edit, it would be like 6 years, 7, I don't know, loads. And it's such a creative process, and that's what I love about documentary. Although I also discovered that making drama, you can be very creative in the edit, and we were. But it really is where you forge the film, and particularly if you've made a film like me, where it's been unscripted, and you have what you hope is good material or strong material, but you really don't know how you're going to fashion it. And there are certain films I've made, like The Fallen, which we really didn't find the structure of that film until we were in the edit, and then the structure became really important. For me, it's a place to be creative and a place to enjoy, and again, a place to work with somebody who you really, really get on with and want to sit next to all day, who brings a fresh eye and wonderful talent into that room.
Do you spend more time than most filmmakers, would you say, in the edit? Do you put your money into the edit, you know, as it were?
I mean, yes, probably.
So
you know,
more than 6 to 8 weeks you'd spend in an edit?
Well, it depends. I mean, if it's, yeah, I mean, we try and, 6 weeks is often a sort of standard for a TV hour, which is actually very short, and we try and give people more than that, budget permitting. For my own films, if they've tended to be longer, then the edit, that's reflected in the edit. The edit is longer. Yeah.
So it's a priority for you?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. Any questions? More questions? Oh, yes, somebody there. There we go. Microphone on that side. Can you see near the back? Sure. There.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. Looking at all of the some of them, they have like a theme of children. Would you say that you were kind of influenced by your parents' jobs, or do you think that was just kind of a bit of an interest?
I think, you know, not all of them have that theme, but, you know, certainly I've made films with young people before, but I think people at really interesting stages of their lives, you know. I mean, often young people have a really interesting perspective on life or what's going on around them. Often they're going through a transition. When I was with the kids who were on the mass camp, it felt they were on the cusp of, you know, leaving home, going to university. In some ways, they were incredibly knowledgeable and mature in that way. Their minds were very mature in terms of knowledge, but the experiences that they'd had were quite limited, and they were also finding the world outside quite challenging for various reasons. And some of them, particularly if they were on the autistic spectrum, as several of them were, found forming relationships difficult, and, you know, so it's a really interesting time to be with them in their lives. And yeah, I suppose that's just the way that it works, and, you know, I like seeing the world through a young person's eyes as well. I think it's an interesting perspective.
Okay, any last question? Yes, last question there, please.
I was just curious, in terms of, you know, presenting the
viewer with the real and the reality. Can you have? Is there like an extent of to how much powerful imagery you can show? Just if that makes sense, because you don't want to take away from the meaning.
I mean, I think you've always got to be careful about overdoing something if it feels inappropriate. Again, there's a line, and we judge ourselves where that line is. But I'm sure for some people it's crossed, and I think it's just a judgment that you've got to make. You don't want to exploit anyone or feel that you're showing something that unwittingly even exploits them. You've just got to use your judgment.
You don't want to self-censor too much.
No, I wouldn't self-censor, but I just think, is it appropriate? Am I being invasive in this situation? Is it something that these people are comfortable with? And I think sometimes when you're dealing with difficult subjects, particularly if it was around, the death of young people in the film Scenes from a Teenage Killing, and we showed some quite harrowing stuff, and that included young people who were in a coffin, in an open casket situation, which is very shocking. But again, it was important to be confronted with that, because that was the reality of what was happening. And for me, that sent out a very strong message that this can be the consequence of some of these minor feuds or situations that develop, and the consequences can be very extreme.
Thank you. So as we wind up, is the next project going to be a feature film or a documentary, Morgan?
I've got a couple of feature film projects on the brewing, but they take quite a long time to brew, and I've got a feature documentary on the go as well.
Which is about what?
It's in the world of Formula One racing, but it's kind of about women in Formula One.
That sounds very interesting. Can't wait for that. OK, well, we're right out of time, but thank you very much to everybody for coming along, and most of all, thank you to Morgan Matthews for your time.